First, we're taking your calls on the two-child cap on benefits for families receiving universal credit. And we're asking if we should let parents claim benefits for every child they have. Currently, the cap stops them from claiming more cash from the state for any additional children after their first two. But do you think the government should keep that cap, or should they ditch it and let parents claim benefits for every child born? We'd love your calls on this. 0207 862 2222. Owen, what do you think?
The question is, should we impose poverty on children? This is the biggest single generator of child poverty in Britain. By the end of today, another more than 100 children will be driven into poverty because of this policy. Even if you took it at face value on motive, it punishes the child for decisions taken by parents. But in any case, parents' circumstances change. People lose jobs, their incomes get slashed. People can't predict the size of their families. I've got a twin sister. They did not predict that their children would double overnight. Most of the families affected in work, they're working families. Also, the research shows it hasn't made the family size reduce. Also, we need more children in this country because we've got a falling birth rate, which is why Nigel Farage, even he wants to abolish this. And also it shows people haven't increased their levels of work because of it. So it fails on its own terms. It just drives kids into poverty.
Right, let's just have a look at exactly what we're talking about here and what the government's current stance is. So we're absolutely clear, because there are a number of different benefit areas, and this affects just one of them. So I've got here two families. This one has two kids, two parents, two kids. And over here, the other family slightly larger with three children. And of course, if the two-child benefit cap means the youngest child, unfortunately, has to wear the cap. And that is where the benefits stop, with that child there. So I'll just explain a bit more about this. We'll use actually a bit of ChatGPT for this. So we've checked it all out. But it's very interesting how this actually works in practice. So I asked, describe how the two-child benefit cap works in the UK. That was my question. And this is the answer I got. And by the way, producer Matt Spencer has checked the details of this reply. So the cap is a policy introduced in April 2017, restricts means-tested financial support, specifically universal credit and child tax credit, to the first two children. So once you have another child, you don't get the support. It's crucially children born on or after 6th of April 2017. There are some exceptions: multiple births, twins, triplets, Owen, you mentioned, children adopted from local authority care, cases where the child was conceived as a result of non-consensual sex. So there are exceptions. The campaigners say the cap essentially means you lose $3,500 per child for each child that isn't eligible, each child after your second. Labour is trying to change it, and don't get confused, they say, with the overall benefit cap. The cap is set. This is the absolute total of number of benefits you can receive, about $25,000 if you're in London, less outside. The crucial issue to add here is this. Here we have the family. This family didn't necessarily have three kids knowing they couldn't afford them. What if they had the kids when they were earning and something happened? Just put that. That's the unfairness people talk about. These two both had jobs. He got ill. She had to care for him. They had three kids, and the state says sorry. And that's the argument against, Clemmie, isn't it?
That is the argument against it, but I would say keep the cap. The policy is humane as it is, and the welfare state is so bloated already. Can we afford another $3.5 billion, which is this is going to cost? You know, would you not be better spent for NHS, for education, for helping people to learn how to cope with their budget? You know, there's no budgeting lessons at schools. Kids aren't taught what a mortgage is or how they should, be responsible. And instead, you're just throwing money after a problem. And I don't think a child is in poverty because of this policy. Well,
of course they are, because if you take £3,000 out of a family's budget and they're already just above the poverty line or not earning very much, then they're driven into poverty.
But 1 million people are on universal credit more than they were this time last year.
Yeah, and
where does it end?
We've got a low-wage economy. I mean, universal credit
but
goes...
$1 million more, though, Owen.
Yeah, well...
That makes sense?
Well, we've got a low-wage economy, and we end up having to subsidise low wages because bosses don't pay their workers properly. Universal credit, of course, goes to lots of people in work. As I said, most people in work who are hit by this policy. You say we can't afford it. We can't afford child poverty, because what we know from every bit of research is children who grow up in poverty are more likely to suffer lifelong consequences, for example, whether it be mental health issues, physical health issues. You're more likely to have asthma, for example, if you're a child who grows up in poverty. So actually, child poverty ends up costing us more. But in any case,
once you create a net, do you create an incentive for people to use the net?
Well, what incentive is there? If you're not working and you're given a nice house and a bigger house if you have more children, what incentive is there to give up the benefits?
That's the argument.
If that were true, family size would have reduced because of this policy. It hasn't. It has had no impact. The idea people have kids as a cash cow, it costs a couple £166,000 to raise a child and $220,000 for a lone parent. You're going to lose a lot of money if you have a kid. The fact is, this just you say it doesn't drive kids into poverty. It objectively does. That's the problem. It drives hundreds of thousands of children either into poverty or deeper into poverty.
Right. I'll come
Why
back
make
to you in a
them
second,
suffer?
Clemmie. And I should say, Bridget Phillipson, Education Secretary, has said this morning that it's not off the table to remove the cap. So Labour are doing a number of real screeching reverses at the moment, including winter fuel, and maybe the benefits cap is the next one. Marie in London, do you think they should kill it?
No. I think that there needs to be some disincentive for those families that have generational benefits. They don't work. Grandmother doesn't work, mother doesn't work, children never work. As somebody, I'm a Labour supporter. I grew up in a council estate. We see this. Those that are working in these poorer areas are worse off because these families never work a day in their life, and they have multiple children. I only have one child. I can only afford to have one child, and these families continue to, for want of a better word, breed and continue to claim benefits. There needs to be a disincentive to that.
Let Owen come in here.
Miri, what you're saying isn't true because most people affected by this are in work. They're working households. The people, many of these people being affected are, I don't know, cleaners or care workers.
Marie says she's had one child because she can only afford one child. She's saying other people have children without being able to afford them.
Again, we can't afford not to...
No, that's a different thing. Come on.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. You didn't let me finish.
Would you have children if you couldn't afford them?
Society can't afford...
You wouldn't.
Of course I wouldn't.
Well, hold on. People are making that decision, by the way, because they think they can't afford children, and it's having a disastrous effect.
That's what Marie's saying. They should be.
It's having a disastrous effect on our society because our working age population is shrinking. We can't support pensioners anymore. That's why Nigel Farage, of all people, wants to get rid of this policy. The fact is, what this does, all this does, it doesn't reduce family size. It hasn't reduced family size since it's been introduced. It hasn't incentivise people to take up more work. Actually, the evidence shows it makes it less likely because people don't, for example, get skills.
I'm interrupting you only because I want to give Clemmie a fair shake here.
No, I just think there's got to be some level of parental responsibility. And of course, there are exceptions to the rules. And I think,
Triplets is an example.
Yeah, of course. Or, disability or whatever, of course. But at the moment, more and more people, 40% of people aren't in work who are claiming this. And that is wrong. And, as our caller said, as Marie said, it's a generational thing that we've got to address the problem.
But it isn't generational. What we're talking about, most people are at work. Why do we not keep... And a lot of these people who are out of work for a period of time. The number of people who are out of work generation after generation is a tiny number of people.
We're not saying you can't have any children. Two's fine.
Well, if people were now making decisions in this country that they're not going to have kids because they would financially struggle, most people would stop having children and then our birth rate would completely collapse. Right. Do you want that? Is that what we want?
Pause. Marie, thank you for your call. After the break, we'll have more calls on the two-child benefit cap. Should parents be allowed to claim for every child they have? 020 7862 2222. Let's have some more calls on the two-child benefit cap. Labour now vacillating on a number of issues here. The winter fuel payment thing, they now got under the bonnet with that one, and maybe with this as well. Sharon in Staffordshire, hi.
Good morning, Jeremy. Good morning, Clemmie and Owen. Now, my view on this is 1,000% not. It should not be changed. I don't mind the two-cap system at the moment, but why should taxpayers have to be funding these people and their children all the time? I've had to work to look after my children. And can I just make a point to Owen as well, please?
Sure.
Owen,
go for it, Sharon.
You're talking about poverty. These children have got the latest gadgets. They wear the best designer clothes. How can they be poverty? You answer me that. How?
Well, you're going to trigger him into his Dimble lecture now. But anyway,
I'm not going to do that.
How can they be poverty?
Sharon, by your definition, because people have mobile phones in Africa, they don't live in poverty. We live in a country where 1 in 3 kids grow up in poverty. It's about 4.3 million, and parents skip hot meals. in order to make sure their kids are fed. That's the country we live in. It's just not true that we have problems with kids not turning up fed properly to schools.
But I think Sharon's point is that people are abusing the system, and it's these people she's talking about, the ones with the...
But what we're saying here is...
What you're saying. Sharon's not saying the same as you.
Well, very good, Jeremy. Anyway, whatever. If someone's parent, for example, died, all of a sudden, they have 3 kids, and they died, you would then drive the kid into poverty. Why? What's the point of doing that, Sharon?
Well, Clemmie, that's true. That sounds... a change of circumstances is the great argument in Owen's armoury here, isn't it? Because
that's the one
the state's got to be there for that.
Yeah, that's the one he's got me on, the only one he's got me on. Otherwise, I stand by 2 children, and if you can't afford a third, I'm sorry, you shouldn't be having a third, because you're putting more strain on an already very bloated, very overworked welfare system.
Sharon, let's ask Sharon, what if you've been in a relationship, Sharon, where, I don't know, the guy was sort of pushing you to have extra kids, and then he wasn't working, and you end up with 5 kids, and you haven't really chosen that. Wouldn't you expect the state to help you a bit?
No, Jeremy, they're my children. They're my responsibility, Jeremy. I've had 2 children. I split up from my children's father when they were 3 and 6. I went out to work. I didn't depend on the state because they were my children, and I didn't have other children. I did not.
Well, all right, Sharon, thank you. Emily in Essex, hi.
Hello. How are you
Sharon?
doing? I'd just like to make a quick point on the universal credit one and why it's gone up. It's because everyone's changing it, or the government have changed it from ESA to universal credit, which is why that's gone up.
Understood.
And I think all children have the money. I totally agree with Owen. It's a disgrace. You wouldn't let a child go hungry. It's silly. They took away the milk bottles.
We do.
We do let them go hungry, and it's wrong. They took away the milk bottles. They took away the meals for the kids at schools. What are they going to take away from them next? And I had a child at 19. It wasn't planned. I had no money, and she's growing up to be a wonderful asset to this country, and she works in IT at NHS. So you don't have to be rich, okay? It doesn't take that. I survived on pasta sometimes and no gas, but we got love and you get through that. And, I wanted 10 kids and I would have had them.
Thanks,
but,
Emily.
I wouldn't.
Thank you. Take care. Leanne in Hertfordshire, hi.
Hello, good morning.
Who do you agree with?
I agree with, apart from the previous caller, I agree with the other 2 callers. It should be capped very quickly. I know someone who has 7 kids, never worked a day in their life, and every time the kid got to school age, she was popping another one out, because when they get to school age, that's when the mothers, the parents, get pushed to start working.
But Owen's argument, which is a good one, is...
No, it isn't.
Well, I was going to say, unusually, he's got a good argument here.
But I love the way Jeremy sometimes... You can just hide your bias a little bit.
Let me get to the end of the sentence. His argument is this: we've had the 2-child benefit cap, and your friend, to use your phrase, is still popping them out. So therefore, it's not working. Go on, Leanne.
Leanne?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, keep going.
But no, she's getting money for every single child. She's getting more money than what I would get working full time in a whole year.
That's not true. But Leanne, look, regardless,
that is true.
Regardless,
that is true.
Even though we'll park the fact most children, as I said, hit by this are in working households. What you are saying in practice is, let's punish the child. And you're saying, so what? You're basically saying that's a price worth paying. A child who has no say on whether they come into the world will be driven into poverty, even though the research shows it doesn't reduce family size, it hasn't had an impact, and it hasn't increased work levels.
I don't agree. I don't agree, because there's no excuse for a child to be in poverty when you can go to a supermarket, you can buy vegetables for 8p, 10p, you can buy pasta
Leanne, we've gone through a big...
There's no excuse to be in poverty.
All right.
Leanne, we've gone through a massive cost of living crisis, and most people in poverty are in work. They earn their poverty. You're now saying there's no such thing as poverty in this country apart from people can't budget properly, which is an old Victorian idea.
No, she's saying there are ways
Clemmie.
you can eat cheaply, you can feed your children, look after your children. And obviously we shouldn't be punishing children for their parental irresponsibility. I'm not. I'm just saying there needs to be more emphasis on helping parents and making them realise it's irresponsible massively to be popping out children when you can't afford it.
When your system goes wrong, Clemmie, it is the child who's punished. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree.
It's the child
but children
who ends up poor.
have been punished for the last 20 years. This isn't a new problem. It's getting worse. But that, again, is a myriad of reasons. And again, it's just more education that's needed to prevent this and to help. You know, we need help from the inside out. And this is not going to change anything.
Okay. Hang on, Owen. Leanne, thank you. Karen in London. Hello.
Hi, good morning.
What do you think, Karen?
I think my husband and I, we only had a son. We didn't have any more children, really, because we couldn't afford to. It was before you had universal credit. We're still working. My husband's 72 and I'm 68. So I think that if you can't afford to have them, you shouldn't be having them.
Most people can't afford kids then. And then as a result of that, if we took that literally, about 70% of people would just not have children and the birth rate would collapse and then our workforce would massively shrink and we won't be able to support pensioners.
Is that right?
That's fine. Have two, no more than two.
Well, but again, we need... the reason Nigel Farage... I don't agree with Nigel Farage very much, as you probably would guess. The reason he's saying we should scrap this is because we need to increase the number of children in this country desperately.
Well, can I interrupt you here? Because you keep saying this, but there was a report by the UN in February saying that we're not going to see the population decreasing until the year 2100. So there's a long way to go to then, and we can address it nearer the time. Right now, I don't think we need more children in poverty.
We've got 68 million people in this country now. Every time I look at it, it's gone up.
Because it's about the ratio between the working age population and the pensioners we have. We need people work and they pay taxes. And if we shrink the number of people working, which is what's happening, and we're reducing the number of people coming to this country because people also don't want immigration, we've got a big problem.
We've got someone who agrees with you on the phone, Owen. It's a big moment. Naomi in London, you agree with Owen Jones?
I agree. I don't necessarily think, contrary to what people think, that people are better off on benefits if they have children. Because many are really working just to cover the cost of the nursery, childcare, to enable them to go to work.
Yeah, it's expensive having a child. I think we probably all agree on that. And you're right. And childcare is absolutely crazy.
No one's better off having a kid.
Go on, Amy.
My daughter was paid £100 a day for a nursery as a school teacher. And she had to reduce her hours when she had her second child because she was better off reducing her hours than paying £100 each for two children a day. Basically it's merely covering the cost of a rent over their head, a roof over their head.
Yep.
And because the wages are too low, and especially for people in jobs that are not professional. They're merely just covering their rent just with their salary, let alone anything else.
Naomi, it's people like your sister that the government should be helping. I'm not disputing that. It is the people that abuse the system, take advantage, that give it, make us all angry. That's what we need to cut back on. And by changing this cap, by scrapping it, you're not getting to the root of the real problem that's abusing it for everyone else.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Naomi. And thanks for all your calls.